Rechte Kamera, ne? Ui. Ui. Hello, Julie.
Hi.
Hi, very good to see you. Very happy that everything works out technically. And before we actually, so the presentation now consists of two parts. First of all, well, I will do a short introduction, then Julie will show her presentation, and later on we will hopefully still have the time for some questions and answers. But before we start your presentation, I wanted to first of all welcome you and briefly also introduce you. Julie Edel Hardenberg, she's an artist participating in the exhibition upstairs. She is holds a BA in art from the Art Academy of Trondheim, that already was mentioned a few times today, and also an MA in art theory and communication from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Denmark. Julie is one of the most versatile and productive artists in Greenland. In addition to her curriculum vitae, which count international exhibitions, recognitions, and public tasks, Julie has, alongside her artistic practice, worked with scenography and installations for both featured films, theater plays, and dance shows. She has produced 5 books and has received awards and grants both for visual arts and writing. Her works are characterized by being implemented, conscious, quirky, poetic, with a humorous approach to concepts such as ethnic and cultural identity. So I look very much forward to your I'm always confused. I look into the screen, then I see you, but I'm supposed to look into the camera to see you. So I'm always switching a bit in between, yeah? Yes, let's start your presentation now. I will leave the floor and come back after it. Thank you.
So I've been preparing a presentation. So I'm going to show you some different slides. Okay, let me see. Based on my previous artistic studies of the Danish colonial history's political influence in Greenland, I seek in my art to focus on what I call the colonized mind, exposed to crucial political and cultural influence from Denmark. We humans are archives of human experiences, and therefore my presentation will be based on my own works, which reflects my own artistic process of decolonizing my mind and thought patterns. Next slide, please. Oh, I'd like the previous. Yes. I examine memories, experiences associated with colonial structures that exist among the Greenlandic population in Greenland that has influenced my own artistic process of decolonizing my own mind and thought patterns. Lately, my project turns the focus on what I call the de- and colonized mind, exposed to crucial political and cultural influence from Denmark. Next slide, please. When you are born and raised in a society that is built on colonial structures, it's not always that you as a citizen are aware of your own contribution to reproducing the colonial system. This is the monument of Hans Egede, the Danish Norwegian missionary who introduced Inuit for Christianity and therefore the colonization in Greenland in 1721. Next slide, please. After the end of World War II, and with the establishment of the United Nations, the process of decolonization of European colonial possessions began, where human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples came on the agenda. 75 years later, there's a perception among the general European public that the decolonization processes that took place under the auspices of the UN are now a colonial past, which is not the case since the old colonial power structures still exist. Next slide, please. In the case of Greenland, the country formerly ceased to be a colony without significant change in the colonial power structures. While the UN had guidelines for what the colonial power should present of political choices to the colonies, Denmark did not follow these guidelines, as they only presented 2 options to the Greenlandic National Council, which did not have a mandate to make such a fundamental decision. Greenland could become fully independent or be integrated into the Danish state. The mandatory 3rd option, free association, was never presented as an option to the Greenlandic National Council. Next slide, please. In 1953, Greenland was incorporated as an integrated part of the Danish state, and Danish labor went to the country and organized a new reality and structure with the takeover of leading positions in society, which supported the building of society according to the Danish model. The general self-perception of the Dane as the good and helping culture made its entrance and legitimized a new era of Danishation, which in reality meant a recolonization of Greenland. Next slide, please. Since then, Galatlit Greenlanders has been struggling with the colonial power structures that exist in Greenland, where Danes and Danish companies still are favored on a broad scale. In 1979, Greenland gained home rule governance and got its own flag in 1986, representing the uprising of the sun above the inland ice. My grandparents and my mother were born in Greenland in the colonial era. I was born in Greenland while it was still defined as a Danish county. I gave birth to my children where Greenland had achieved its home rule governance and its own national flag. Next slide, please. I was born in 1971, 18 years after Greenland became a region municipality under Denmark since 1953. In the elementary school, we were separated in 2 groups, in Danish-speaking and Greenlandic-speaking classes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. With roots in Nordic and Inuit cultures, I have an insight into different Inuit Galatlit Greenlanders' identity and self-understanding. Nonetheless, the economics and social interdependencies between the 2 countries and their impact on the Greenlanders, caught in a shared identity between power and powerlessness. Next slide, please. I observed early on which group of ethnicities, languages, and habits had the most beneficial outcomes and success in our society. Clearly, it was the Danish-speaking minority in my local community. Next slide, please. My husband, Sven, and I were the first generation in both our families to give our children Inuit names, Nuiana, Anuik, and Navana. And I remember that our parents were astonished by our decision of naming our children with Inuit names. Next slide, please. In my 20s, I went to the Nordic countries to study art, and there I realized that I really didn't fit in. My appearance weren't Nordic. My culture wasn't Nordic. My language wasn't Nordic. Next slide, please. Our flag was Nordic in the sense that the Greenlandic flag was the only one without a Christian cross in it. Next slide, please. I didn't feel a sense of belonging anywhere, not even in Greenland with its educational system, which was a copy of the Danish system. Next slide. please. But I did what I was expected. I adapted into the Danish, Nordic language, culture, and mindset. So this text is written the Greenlander in the Danish way. Next slide, please. After graduating in 2000, I returned to Kalaallit Greenland, and had been working with the perspective of identity and post-colonial structures since then. Next slide, please. As a well-educated Greenlander, we quickly entered a Danish-minded and privileged environment. Next slide, please. But something was wrong. I felt alienated. Next slide, please. I didn't understand why I was still dissatisfied and sensed that something was unredeemed. Next slide, please. In 2002, I was invited to attend the Inuit Youth International Seminar with subsequent attendance at the ICC Inuit Circumpolar Conference in Goodjob, Canada. And thereby I became aware of Indigenous people's rights, which gave me a more critical perspective on my own historical background. 4 years later, I was a part of the project Rethinking Nordic Colonialism, organized by Kuratorisk Aktion. Next slide, please. I started questioning my own personal identity contra national identity. At that point, I had no knowledge about post-colonial issues, nor discussed it with anyone at home. It came later, in 2006, with my participation at the Nordic art project called Rethinking Nordic Colonialism. Themes like assimilation and colonized or decolonized minds were suddenly a theme in my mind. Next slide, please. So between 2008 and 2009, I started the project a linguistic, psychological, and cultural experiment where I, for 6 months, spoke exclusively Greenlandic Kalaallisut. It came from the fact that our daughter thought that the Danish language that she and other children use in kindergarten was a Greenlandic language, and that my spoken language, Inuit Kalaallisut, was a foreign language. Next slide, please. The project gave me an insight into the internal tensions of society regarding language, identity, ethnicity, affiliation, and the existing power structures. Not everyone could see the situation I brought them into by only wanting to communicate in Inuit Kalaallisut Greenlandic. Often one copies one circle of friends by conforming to the linguistic premises of others, one's parents or peers, instead of changing the state of things. Next slide, please. The years passed, and all the while we got a more critical look at society and structure. We found that the colonial structures exist and are reproduced in society through the practice of structural racism. Next slide, please. In 2017, I was invited to a project called Unravelings at Copenhagen-based exhibition space called Meter. The exhibition looks at Denmark as a colonial power and how this affects today's society and our sense of national identity. In the first stage, the theme was centered around Vidme, whiteness, archive, a collective project that focuses on the violence attached to the color white, institutional power, and the selective national memory. Next slide, please. In my contribution called Disconnection, an installation presented mapping regarding language within management and boards, amongst our own companies, NGOs, and media, would show that Kalaallit Inuit Greenlanders were a clear minority. Next slide, please. That's why it's important to tell our story from our own perspective. This is a project I made in 2011. It is a portrait of different Inuit, Galactic, Greenlandic citizens staging as movie stars in movie posters. Next slide, please. It is up to the viewer to make the story. Next slide, please. Family movie. Next slide, please. Drama. Next slide, please. Comedy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, 301 years after Hans Egel's arrival to Greenland, I tell my kids that we are a product of our history. I'm teaching my children that our history does not begin with the colonization of Greenland 300 years ago, nor with the conversion to Christianity. Instead, the history of our people goes way back in history. Our ancestors had great skills and deep knowledge on how to survive in the Arctic region, exactly like we know where we belong and how to develop and continue living in our homeland. Next slide, please. I let my children understand the complexity of the world history and the different impacts it has had on indigenous cultures. I teach them that they are a product of human history and that diversity means inclusion of endangered languages and cultures in the world. Roena, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was a very interesting presentation. And I would like now to go into detail concerning a few of the points that you made. This is my watch, okay. Actually, when you said that during your studies in the north, in Denmark and Norway in the late 1990s and early 2000s, you realized that you somehow do not fit because of your appearance, your culture, and your language. All of that is not Nordic. When returning to Greenland, you also felt alienated because of the educational system that is a straight copy of the Danish one. So your home even felt infiltrated. I assume that this is an experience that a lot of people with a migratory background have, the feeling of being a stranger in your own land, as well as being a foreigner abroad. And I would like to know how it does feel today, in Nuuk, since this experience is already a while ago. And also maybe we can ask, how do your children feel that you were educating in the awareness of the historical colonial processes and the pressure of assimilation?
Yeah, I mean, culturally, I feel home in the landscape and among the Inuits here, a Galactic in the society. And then as a decolonized and critical individual towards society, I still do feel alienated because of the oppressive structure in the society. As I see it, I'm not assimilated enough for society to give me the space, for example, for public speech. But it's actually changing because for the first time in 22 years in Nuuk, I got an invitation to have an exhibition here at the local art museum. But it's taken me 22 years.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's
So, for example, concerning my kids, for example, our eldest daughter, who's 22, she's chosen to study in the US in Boston. She got a scholarship.
Okay.
And before that, she went to Japan to learn Japanese for a year, and then she went to a boarding school also in UK. So we have invested a lot of our own time to prepare our kids to be global, but still be aware of their own background and indigenousness. So, and the younger ones, they are like 14 and 16. The boy has been in a boarding school in Denmark for a year, and then now he's going to Italy, and the youngest is going to a boarding school in Denmark. So, but I think they'll at a certain point they'll have to, they'll be aware of those issues.
Yeah, that's of course very good. That I think, as far as I understood your presentation, and also maybe from previous exchange that we had, I understood that for yourself, I mean, it was also a process to de-assimilate, in a sense, to decolonize, and in a sense to also be aware of the fact how you were maybe manipulated, maybe in a way, through the educational system. Is that something that you would agree with?
I think, I mean, we are formed by history and the different time, and I'm a part of that generation who was supposed to, become a part. Since we were Danish citizens, we are still Danish citizens, so we were supposed to adapt to the Danish mindset, and still we are. But I think my own awareness of my own culture and family history had made me, kind of struggled more. Mm-hmm. And also because of my ethnic looks, I've always felt alienated somehow among the Nordic countries, in the Nordic countries while I studied.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. I think this is something that we had later. After our talk, there will be a performance with Lilibet Cuenca Rasmussen from Copenhagen, who was born in Manila in the Philippines, and she mentioned actually today that during her studies, she was in the entire art school, maybe one of two people, of brown people, actually, people that were kind of visually different. And of course that changed maybe now in recent years. Also I can talk about Germany in that sense, that it became more diverse. But this was not so much the case, for example, when I studied. Yeah? It was still an exception to have, for example, a person of color or something like that. Also, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that in 2002 you attended the Inuit Youth International Seminar in Canada, and you also described how you developed a more critical perspective regarding your own historical background in this context. And indeed, the Inuit territory spreads from Greenland to central and northeast Canada. I mean, you showed the map with Europe and Greenland, and from there we can already understand what the size of this territory. But what I wanted to ask you is, was the fight for maybe Inuit rights in Canada somehow something that was prototypical for you in Greenland? Was there, or is there still a strong exchange with Canada, maybe also in terms of artistic exchange?
I think there's a very little cultural exchange happening, since most of the existing funds is connected to the Nordic and Scandinavian projects. For example, the yearly project in Nuuk, Nordic Festival, is very well funded. But I think it's actually the demandings for more exchange among the Inuits in Canada, Alaska, it's increasing. And actually there is also Inuits in Siberia, but we are not connected to those actually. I was actually going there in 89 when still it was Soviet Union, but I never managed to go there because I got measles on the way and was lying in the hospital in Leningrad at that time, but that's way back, 89.
I assume that is maybe something that, this is maybe also a question to our Sami guests here. I think also in a way the Sami in the Russian part are also in a way less connected than the ones in Finland, Sweden and Norway. We saw in your presentation that your work is also very often using the symbols of national representations like flags, for example. And also the work that we have here at Kindle is a Danish flag with bushes of black hair. Also, I very much paid attention to the fact that you said that the Inuit flag, the Greenlandic flag, is the only flag in the Nordic region that doesn't have the symbol of a cross. Maybe can you comment a little bit why you work so much with elements of national representation?
I think, it goes way back because when I was a kid, when the Queen of Denmark came to visit Greenland with family, they were, in the public space, people were, viewing with the Danish flag. So I brought up with the Danish flag, and even at birthday parties at home at my grandparents, they used the Danish flag. And suddenly, on the way when I got into my teenage years, we suddenly changed into the Greenlandic flag. So we suddenly had another representation towards our culture. So that's the thing. My mother and I and my grands were born actually into the Danish flag, and my kids are born with the Greenlandic flag.
Yeah.
So, and concerning hair sewed into the flags, it's also a comment on the, and also to drag the attention to those hidden and untold stories within the Danish history and the Danish self-perception and narratives about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also the brushes and that you use, with blonde and black hair, So hair is also obviously something that you work with a lot. But also you could depict the Danish flag as a straitjacket, There is this work where it is a straitjacket, but she, the protagonist in the photo, has open arms and the arms are not bound, at least. Maybe that's a little sign of hope in that context. I don't know. There is also that I thought was really a very brave project that you mentioned in your presentation when you decided to exclusively speak Greenlandic for 6 months. In your daily life, and I would like to hear a little bit more about that. How was that practically? What would you do if you would meet a person that really doesn't understand a word? How was it for you? And then it was 6 months. It was not 2 hours. That's really a very interesting, curious experience, I imagine.
Yeah, but the idea was, what would happen if I insisted on speaking my own language in my own home city? So I had 2 rules. I would insist on speaking in my own language towards people I met on the street, unless they were tourists.
Okay.
Unless I was connected with with people from Europe on meetings or something. But otherwise, I only spoke Greenlandic for half a year, and it really gave me an insight. And actually, my life and family life changed from that on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we became more aware of our own mindset and also our own habits in our families. For example, at first, my family thought I was too rebellious and I should be careful because you never know what would happen. And also because I indirectly criticize the system and also indirectly provoke a lot of people with my project. For example, my husband and I, we were invited to a reception to celebrate the director of one of the government-owned companies. When we arrived, we were welcomed by him in Danish, and I smiled to him. And when I replied in Greenlandic, the situation became very awkward as he didn't understand what I was saying. So while I was trying to explain to him about my language project, his wife appeared, his Danish wife appeared with an awkward smile and asked, "What are you up to, crazy woman?" So, but I have to smile once again, and in Greenlandic, I explain my project, while I actually sense a distance from my own fellows who became embarrassed because of me, since I created the awkward atmosphere. Yeah. So that was very awkward also for me.
I imagine. Yeah, it is indeed a very radical project. Yeah, I find it really very interesting. So you mentioned also the project Rethinking Nordic Colonialism, and also since 2006. With this project, you were participating in quite a huge amount of exhibitions, and there were also other exhibitions with the participation of indigenous artists from Northern Europe. We already spoke today about the fact that the Northern Pavilion in the Venice Biennial this year became a Sami pavilion. Or also, if we think about exhibitions like the one that we are having here at Kindle, what do you think about these type of projects? Is the art system, in your eyes, able to raise awareness and create change? Or is it rather something whitewashing, exoticizing, or is it something in between?
I mean, I've been working with those issues for 25 years, almost 3 decades. So what I've realized is that the colonial structures is still very strong, and you have to be very consistent on what you are doing and actually make alliances through a wide scale of representations in society. And you don't always have to observe and listen at the same time. I think try to do some observation without listening, and then also try listening without any observation. What I'm trying to say is that what we see and hear is not always representing the truth. It sounds cryptic, but I hope you get it. And concerning, the critical approach to it also is, I think, depending on the institutions. For example, a lot of the projects going on here in Greenland is mostly in Nuuk. I think a lot of them is whitewashing projects. So you have to be very critical towards it.
I see. Let me now also open the floor to the public with questions. I think, is it true you only see me, you don't see the public, is it right? It's true. Yeah, so maybe it's a bit awkward also, but I also would like to give the public the opportunity to also actively participate in the discussion. And maybe you can come up with a few questions for Julie.
Hi, Julie. It's Christine speaking, the co-curator of the exhibition Landscapes of Belonging. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. We have also in the exhibition Landscapes of Belonging, we also have an artwork of Pia Arke. Mm-hmm. And I wondered how important she might also be for your work as a person who has also I think, a Danish mother and a Greenlandic father. I thought it would be really nice to hear if her work was also important for your oeuvre, maybe as a strong female in the arts.
I mean, Pia Aré is the frontier in those post-colonial, working with post-colonial issues, and her father was actually a Dane and the mother Greenlandic from the east part of Greenland. At first, when I began my studies in art, she was actually very active as an artist, and at first I didn't understand her work, but it became later. So I think she's becoming more and more important. But the thing is that most people in Greenland doesn't know about her work because she hasn't really had the attention. But she is well known among artists, but not among the population.
All right.
I think the thing is that Pia Aré was a Danish-speaking Greenlander. So it's so important. That's why it's so important with language to communicate your knowledge further on to the society and to gain knowledge and also be aware of, that give the options and possibility to, make this vekselvirkning, this exchange of knowledge. And that's why language is so important.
Any more questions, dear public?
Hello, I'm Ingrid Wagner. Nice to meet you. I was astonished as you told us your stories about your studies in the northern countries, and you felt excluded by your physics, or how come? Because you are looking like, I would say, excuse me, everybody else here, white, brown hair, everything is fine. I think you spoke perfect Danish. Oh, and English, you're speaking perfectly English. So what was it that make you feel this exclusion?
I mean, when I went to Finland in the mid-90s, I studied 2 years in Finland and then afterward 4 years in Norway. I think at the early 90s, there weren't that many not blonde-haired or, types studying in the academics or in the art world. So I was always the exotic girl. At that time I had very long hair. So most people always thought that our First Nation American.
American. They thought you were First Nation American. Okay.
But the thing, when you become a part of a society and you kind of sense on the people that they are aware of your ethnic looks, that actually also have an effect on you. Even though I don't walk with a mirror, I can mirror myself through the actions of people.
Yeah. All right. One more last question before we have to close this wonderful talk. I'm actually amazed that it works so well technically. It feels a bit like you work around the corner, but you're not.
Yeah. Can I show you my view? So, I mean, you are sitting in Berlin and I'm sitting in Nuuk. I think it could be good for you to see actually how
Yes, please, give us
it looks
a
just
tour.
outside my window.
That's
So,
funny.
most people in Greenland have a sea view.
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. And then it looks very good, but I also have to show you the scenes.
Oh. Oh, wow, yes, the rocks. The rocks.
So it's filled with all colorful houses and also with the new modern architecture.
Yes, very nice. Yeah, it looks a little bit different from Berlin-Neukölln, I have to say, where we are just now. Thank you so much, Julie. It was excellent talking to you.
Have a nice evening. Bye.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, now you all have to leave the room, because before we start with the performance of Lilibet Coentha Rasmussen and her team, we will change the setting. You will come into a completely different space. And this might take us about 15 minutes. You can also, I at least will take the possibility to also have a cigarette, to have maybe even a little first drink or something, and then we come back. See you in about 15 minutes. Please take your things with you, yeah? Thank you.